Climbing Mount Everest, it's the most expensive lottery in the world, and your life is on the line. You can spend thousands of dollars on the best gear, but once you enter the death zone, all that money means nothing. At 8,000 meters, your body is starved of oxygen and you start to shut down. And it's often your mind that goes first, long before your muscles or your lungs give out. The mountain doesn't care who you are, a rookie, a seasoned pro, or a climbing legend. It offers no forgiveness for mistakes, leaving bodies right where people simply couldn't take one more step. And at a certain point, survival is no longer a team sport. So, why do people keep climbing, knowing that when things go wrong, help might not be on the way? This video tells 12 tragic stories left behind on the slopes of Everest. Tragedy number 1. The Khumbu Icefall avalanche of 2014. The morning of April 18, 2014, the Khumbu Icefall on the south face of Everest. A group of high-altitude porters are making their way up the route with supplies. It's routine work before the main season kicks off. In a few minutes, this ordinary workday will become the single deadliest tragedy in Everest's history. 16 people will die in an avalanche. Another 9 will be injured. But that's just the beginning. Because what happens next is something that has never happened on Everest before. The entire climbing season on the mountain's south side will be shut down. Hundreds of climbers who've paid tens of thousands of dollars will turn around and go home. And the Sherpas, the very people without whom commercial Everest simply wouldn't exist, will, for the first time in history, refuse to work. This is the story of how one avalanche destroyed not just a route, but the entire system. And about the people who risk their lives every day in a place where tourists only see the summit. Let's start at the very beginning. April on Everest is like a dress rehearsal for the main event. Base camp, at 5,364 meters, transforms into a small city of colorful tents, hundreds of people, dozens of expeditions, tons of gear, and while the clients are acclimatizing, sipping tea and waiting for their moment, the real work is happening up high. The high-altitude porters, the Sherpas, ascend the South Col route every single day. It's the classic path to the summit from the south side, tested by thousands of climbs. They haul oxygen bottles, tents, food, and gas stoves. A single porter might travel this route up to 10 times in a season. A client, twice at most. Because the client is paying for everything to be ready and waiting for them up there. And then there are the Icefall doctors, the elite of the Sherpa community. Their job starts even earlier. They're the first ones into the Khumbu Icefall, forging the path. They set aluminum ladders across crevasses, rig ropes, and secure handrails. The route changes every season. The ice shifts, crevasses widen, old passages collapse. The doctors work in shifts, adjusting the line, moving ladders to safer spots. By mid-April, the season is just gearing up. The big summit pushes will begin in May, when the weather window opens. For now, teams of porters are methodically ferrying gear from base camp to Camp 1 and from Camp 1 to Camp 2. Standard logistics, a routine polished to perfection. April 18th is just another workday. Several dozen people set out from base camp in the dark to get through the icefall before the sun softens the ice. Radio communication, coordination through expedition managers, everything is going according to plan. No one knows that in an hour, that plan will be shattered. The Khumbu Icefall is the first major obstacle on the way to the summit, and it's the most dangerous. There's no way around it. If you're climbing from the south, you go through it, period. A kilometer of vertical chaos between base camp and Camp 1. The Icefall doctors find the least dangerous path each season, but the word safe simply doesn't apply here. There are sections with ominous names. Popcorn Field, a field of tightly packed ice blocks with almost no room to maneuver. The Golden Gate, a narrow passage between enormous seracs, towers of ice, that hang overhead from both sides. In places like these, there's only one path, no alternative. You follow the rope that's been laid out and pray the ice doesn't decide to shift right now. The biggest threat is collapse. A serac can give way without any warning. The temperature changes, the ice cracks, gravity does its work. Sometimes an entire tower falls. Sometimes a chunk the size of a bus breaks off. The result is the same, an avalanche that sweeps away everything in its path. And here's the paradox. The people who cross the icefall Most often are the ones who take the greatest risk. A client might cross it 2 or 3 times in an entire season. A Sherpa, 10, 15, even 20 times. Each time is another spin of the roulette wheel. Each crossing is another chance to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's impossible to accurately assess the risk. Weather stations are at base camp, but the icefall is higher up. Data on temperature, humidity, and ice conditions is all approximate. Decisions are made based on experience, intuition, and luck. The icefall doctors look at the cracks, listen to the ice creak, and remember what was safe yesterday. But the ice has a life of its own. What was stable yesterday can collapse today. On April 18, 2014, a group is moving through one of these sections. A routine route, a familiar track, practice movements. The time is around 6:30 in the morning. The temperature is still low, the ice is hard, everything is normal, 6:30 a.m. A group of porters is moving along a familiar section. Some are carrying oxygen bottles, others have tents and food. A standard load, a normal pace. They do this every day. They know every ladder, every rope. They have several more hours of climbing ahead to reach Camp 1. And then, a crack, a deep rumbling sound that you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. Somewhere above, a serac breaks loose. A massive tower of ice loses its footing and begins to fall. Tons of ice come crashing down, shattering into pieces, dragging more with them. The avalanche gains speed. It roars. It erases everything in its path. The section it hits is either the popcorn field or the Golden Gate. Sources differ on the details, but the essence is the same. A narrow corridor, a dense maze of ice blocks, with minimal room to escape. The climbers don't even have time to understand what's happening. The avalanche buries those directly under the serac. And it keeps rolling, sweeping away those further down the route. Then, silence. The dust of crushed ice settles, and the chaos begins. At base camp, the first reports come in over the radio. Fragments of sentences, shouts, static. An accident in the icefall. People are buried. They need help, but no one knows how many are hurt. Some of the group are entombed in ice. Others are missing. It's unclear where they were when it hit, if they're alive, if they can make contact. Rescue teams head up into the icefall. They work with their hands, with ice axes, with shovels. Every minute counts, but the conditions are horrific. Ice boulders the size of cars, sharp edges, an unstable surface. The risk of another collapse is high. And then there's the altitude. At 5,800 meters, every movement takes 3 times the effort. By the evening of April 18th, the picture becomes clearer. 16 people are dead, 9 are injured. It is, at that moment, the deadliest disaster in the history of Everest. All of the dead are Sherpas. All were high-altitude workers who made the season possible. Over the next 2 days, rescuers recover 13 bodies. 3 remain buried under the debris. It's impossible to get to them. The icefall continues to move, crevasses widen, and new blocks of ice hang precariously over the site of the tragedy. The event is instantly named the 2014 Khumbu Icefall Avalanche, the 2014 Mount Everest Ice Avalanche. The numbers flash across news headlines. 16 dead, 9 injured. The worst disaster on Everest. But the numbers are just the beginning. Back at base camp, something no one expected begins to unfold. The Sherpas gather for a meeting, hundreds of them. They demand compensation for the families of the deceased. They demand proper insurance payouts, dignified funerals, and support for the widows and orphaned families. Because the standard insurance at the time covers a laughably small amount, just a few $1,000s for the life of a person who risked everything so tourists could reach the summit. The negotiations are tense. The government of Nepal promises aid, but the sums are minuscule. Expedition operators try to find a compromise, but the situation spirals out of control. And then, the Sherpas make a decision unheard of on Everest. They refuse to work, not just a few of them. Not one expedition, nearly all of them. Hundreds of high-altitude porters and icefall doctors declare the season is over. They will not go back into the icefall. They will not set ladders. They will not carry loads. Not out of fear, though of course there is fear, but out of principle, because their lives are worth more than a few $1,000s in compensation. One by one, the commercial expeditions start to crumble. Clients who paid $50, $60, even $70,000 for their climb are stuck at base camp, realizing a simple truth. Without the Sherpas, there is no summit. The route isn't prepared. The gear hasn't been delivered. The ladders aren't set. The ropes aren't fixed. Only a handful of elite alpinists who don't need support could possibly make it on their own. Everyone else is completely dependent on the Sherpas. The work to prepare the route through the Khumbu Icefall was halted and never resumed. As a result of the April 18th avalanche, 16 high-altitude workers died, and 9 were injured. The bodies of 13 victims were recovered. 3 remained entombed in the icefall. Hundreds of planned ascents were canceled. The 2014 climbing season on the south side of Everest was, for all intents and purposes, over. Tragedy number 2. The earthquake and avalanche of 2015. The deadliest day in Everest's history. In the spring of 2015, commercial expeditions returned to Everest after the previous season's shutdown. April 25, 2015. The start of the season. Everest Base Camp. Hundreds of people are preparing to climb the highest point on the planet. At 11:56 a.m. local time, the ground beneath their feet begins to shake violently. Climbers rush out of their tents to see something that should never happen. From the slopes of Pumori, a wall of ice and snow over 20 meters high comes crashing down. Its speed, over 300 kilometers per hour. In a matter of minutes, the camp at an altitude of 5,360 meters becomes a disaster zone. Tents fly apart like cardboard boxes. Climbers, Sherpas, and camp staff find themselves buried under tons of ice. When the dust settles, it becomes clear. This day will go down in Everest's history as the most devastating tragedy at base camp. Over 20 dead, dozens injured, and the entire climbing season canceled. Again. But let's rewind a few hours. The morning of April 25th at base camp begins like any other. The spring season is in full swing. Hundreds of climbers from all over the world have gathered here with a single goal in mind: to conquer an 8,000er. The previous season was cut short by an avalanche on the Khumbu Icefall. 16 Sherpas died in that incident, and the rest refused to work. The new 2015 season had begun. The camp stretched for nearly 2 kilometers along the glacial moraine. Brightly colored dome tents, yellow, red, blue, poked out from among the rocks and ice, like a sprawling, multicolored city. Each expedition company had set up its own little village. Sleeping tents here, a dining tent there, and a little further on, a gear depot. At the heart of it all, a medical tent stocked with oxygen and first aid supplies. People are having a leisurely breakfast, checking the weather forecast, discussing their climbing plans. Guides are running another briefing, explaining the route through the Khumbu Icefall, the most dangerous section of the journey. Sherpas are hauling gear, preparing ropes and ice screws for the higher camps. Someone's fixing their crampons, someone else is charging a satellite phone to call home. No one is thinking about what could go wrong. Everest is dangerous up there, at 8,000 meters in the death zone, where your body is dying with every passing hour. But down here, in base camp, this is safe. This is home. Morning, April 25th. Less than an hour until noon. Most of the climbers are relaxing after breakfast or taking care of routine tasks. The weather is perfect. A clear sky, almost no wind. An ideal day in the Himalayas. But the safety of base camp is an illusion. Here, the geography itself works against you. The camp sits on the Khumbu Glacier, a massive river of ice that creeps down the valley at a rate of about a meter a day. Beneath the climbers' feet isn't solid ground, but a constantly shifting, cracking mass. The tents are pitched on moraines, ridges of rock and debris that the glacier has been dragging along for centuries. The ground is flat, convenient, but it's also confined. Hundreds of people are crammed into an area the size of a few football fields, and all around them are walls. On 3 sides, the camp is surrounded by steep slopes. Nuptse to the left, Everest to the right, and behind them, Pumori, a 7,000er with sheer ice faces. The valley acts like a funnel. Anything that breaks loose from above, avalanches, ice blocks, rock falls, is channeled directly into the center, right where the camp is spread out. Getting out of here is another problem entirely. At this altitude, a helicopter operates at its absolute limit. The air is thin, reducing the lift of the rotors. Pilots can only take 1 or 2 passengers per trip, no more. If fog rolls in or the wind picks up, all flights are grounded. And if the landing pad is damaged, there's nowhere to land. The nearest hospital with serious equipment is in Kathmandu, 120 kilometers away. The intermediate medical post is in Feriche, a village at 4,000 meters, and it's equipped for about a dozen beds. There are 2 or 3 doctors on duty, a supply of bandages, and oxygen tanks. If it had to handle dozens of casualties at once, the system would simply collapse. All climbers know these risks. They're written in every guidebook, but knowing and understanding are 2 different things. Most people come here for the summit, not to dwell on the risks. They put their faith in the experience of their guides, the strength of their gear, and in their own good luck. April 25th, 11:56 a.m. Luck runs out. The first blow comes from below. The ground lurches so violently that people lose their balance and fall. The glacier beneath them begins to roll in waves, literal waves, like the surface of the water. Tents sway, poles bend, anchor lines snap. Someone screams. Most just freeze in shock, trying to process what's happening. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake. The epicenter is 80 kilometers to the northwest, near Gorka, but the tremors are so powerful, they're felt for hundreds of kilometers around. The shaking lasts for about 50 seconds. For those inside their tents, it feels like an eternity. Some try to run outside, others grab onto poles to keep from falling. The experienced climbers already know what's coming next. All eyes turn upward, toward Pumori, and there, at an altitude of about 7,000 meters, a massive chunk of the glacier breaks off the western face. At first, it looks like a white cloud, a plume of snow dust rising into the air. Then, it becomes clear. This is no cloud. It's a wall, as high as a 7-story building, hurtling down at the speed of an express train. The avalanche covers 1.5 kilometers in a matter of seconds. It sweeps away everything in its path: rocks, ice debris, the remnants of tents from previous seasons. It gathers mass, it accelerates, and slams into base camp. But the impact doesn't just come from below, and it isn't just snow. Racing ahead of the avalanche is an air blast, a shock wave of compressed air pushed forward by the multi-ton mass. It arrives first, and it's this blast that delivers the main blow to the central part of the camp. Tents are ripped from their anchors and thrown dozens of meters. People are knocked off their feet, hurled against rocks. Sturdy expedition structures are torn apart like paper. Then the snow and ice hit. A white wall, 20 meters high, rolls through the camp, burying entire sections. Visibility drops to 0 as everything is engulfed in a cloud of snow dust. Screams, a deafening roar, the splintering of structures, and then silence. A strange, oppressive silence. The initial reports are chaotic. Someone says 5 are dead. An hour later, the number is 10. By evening, the figures are climbing. Too many people aren't responding. Too many tents were in the avalanche's path. April 26th. Dawn brings more tremors. Aftershocks shake the valley again and again. Each one carries the risk of new collapses. Small avalanches break loose from Everest and Nuptse. People flinch at every rumble from above, grabbing their packs, ready to run. But there's nowhere to go. There are only mountains. By midday, the media reports a new number, at least 21 dead. But this is just a preliminary count. Not all the bodies have been found. Not all the injured have been accounted for. And higher up, in camps 1 and 2, climbers who had started their ascent before the earthquake are now stranded. The ropes on the Khumbu Icefall have been severed. The ladders across crevasses have collapsed. They can't get down on their own. All they can do is wait for help. At 6,000 and 6,500 meters, where their supplies of food and oxygen are dwindling with every hour. In the afternoon, the sky finally clears enough for the helicopters to take off. The pilots take a huge risk. The aftershocks continue. Visibility is poor, but every minute counts. The first choppers land right on the glacier, between the debris fields. The injured are carried out on stretchers. The 22 most severe cases are loaded first. Their destination? Feriche, a tiny village a 20-minute flight away. There, they're met by 2 doctors and a few nurses. The clinic was designed for 10 beds. Now it has twice as many patients. April 28th. The media publishes updated figures. 17 killed directly in base camp. Another person dies in the hospital, their body unable to cope with the trauma and the high-altitude strain. 60 injured, 21 of them in serious or critical condition. The Nepal Mountaineering Association releases its own numbers, 19 dead. The discrepancies are easily explained by the chaos of the first few days, the difficulty of identification, and the fact that the victims came from different countries and expeditions. Some are still being searched for under the debris. And up above, at Camps 1 and 2, another operation is underway. The stranded climbers are being airlifted out, 1 or 2 at a time. At this altitude, the helicopters are pushed to their limits. The engines overheat, the rotors barely provide enough lift. The pilots make their approach, grab the climbers, and immediately descend before they lose power. The evacuation drags on for several days. Some are lucky and get picked up on the first day. Others are stuck in the high camps for nearly a week, rationing the last of their food, conserving oxygen, and hoping for good weather. By the end of April, it's official. The spring climbing season on the south side of Everest is over once again. The government of Nepal formally stops issuing climbing permits. The route through the Khumbu Icefall is destroyed. Ropes are torn, ice bridges have collapsed, and crevasses have widened. Rebuilding it in the time remaining is impossible. Hundreds of climbers who paid tens of thousands of dollars for their expedition, trained for months, and dreamed of the summit for years, pack their bags and head down. With no summit, with no chance to try again this year. For commercial mountaineering, this is an unprecedented situation. Yes, the previous season had already been marred by tragedy, when 16 Sherpas died and the work stopped after a walkout. But this time, the cause is different. It's not a human decision, but a force of nature against which there is no defense and no alternative. Base camp begins to empty out at a rapid pace. Tents are taken down. Gear is carried out on yaks. The expeditions disperse. Within a week, almost nothing is left of the multicolored city on the glacier, just snowdrifts, shattered debris, and silence. Tragedy number 3. The Storm of No Return. May 1996. Base camp is buzzing with unprecedented activity. This is no longer just a sport, it's a full-blown industry. Legendary guides are leading clients who are confident of success. Everything seems calculated down to the last detail. The route is fixed, the weather is crystal clear, and the oxygen bottles are ready. People are marching toward their dream, step by step, climbing into the thin, treacherous air. The teams enter the death zone, an altitude of 8,000 meters. Up here, the human body doesn't live. It slowly begins to die. But no one's glancing nervously at their watch. The sky is clear, the wind is still. It feels like Everest is on their side. And just like that, the mountain changes the game. A sudden storm hits with a fury, sweeping away all plans. The temperature plummets to critical lows. Visibility vanishes, dissolving into a whiteout. Dozens of climbers are trapped on a narrow ridge, cut off from safety by a wall of wind and snow. Just 24 hours. The fallout from this day will be catastrophic. This is a story of ambition versus the elements. And the price you pay for trying to conquer the unconquerable. 6 weeks. That's how long climbers live in a tent city on a glacier before making their final push. Base camp is a strange mix of a resort and an army barracks. Generators hum, the air smells of kerosene, and it's thick with anticipation. But you can't just sit around. Clients are forced to play yo-yo, climb to Camp 1, then descend, climb to Camp 2, then back down again. It's an exhausting routine. It's how the body learns to survive where normally only airplanes fly. The guides watch every cough, every glance. The body has to get used to a deficit of everything: warmth, sleep, and air. On May 9th, this pendulum stops. The groups ascend to Camp 4 on the South Col. This isn't really Earth anymore. The landscape is lunar, just rock, ice, and a piercing wind. The altitude is 8,000 meters. Here, no one unpacks. The guides, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, become like Formula One mechanics. They check masks, regulators, oxygen tanks. Here, oxygen is the fuel for life, and the supply is strictly limited. Inside the tents, before the summit push, there is silence. It's nearly impossible to sleep at this altitude. People just lie in their down-filled cocoons, listening to the sounds outside. And outside, there is perfect silence. The forecast promises a rare weather window, a dead calm. It's as if the mountain has opened its gates. Closer to midnight, the camp stirs to life. The sound of zippers cuts through the frozen air. Climbers emerge into the darkness. The sky above is clear, studded with a myriad of stars that seem close enough to touch. The groups line up in single file. Headlamps switch on. The moment is mesmerizing. In the pitch black, a serpent of glowing dots begins to crawl up the steep slope of the triangular face. The only sounds are the crunch of crampons biting into hard fern and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of dozens of people. The leaders set the pace. No one is rushing, but no one is falling behind. Everything is going exactly to schedule. The expedition machine is working flawlessly, and every movement now brings them closer to the summit. The climbers reach the Hillary Step, the last vertical obstacle before the top, and here the machine breaks down. The fixed ropes that should secure the ascent aren't ready. A traffic jam forms on the roof of the world. People stand, pressed against each other on a narrow ledge, and just wait. Precious minutes tick by as guides scramble to set the ropes. An hour of waiting in the freezing cold sucks away what little warmth they have left. But no one turns back. The summit is too close, its pull making them forget the rules. There's an ironclad rule. At 2 p.m., you turn around, no matter where you are. But on this day, the schedule is in tatters. Climbers are crossing the finish line at 3, even 4 in the afternoon. The euphoria of victory clouds their judgment. They snap photos with flags, they hug, oblivious to the sky changing color behind them. They are celebrating a triumph that has already turned into a trap. The mountain springs its trap in an instant. In the afternoon, the wind doesn't just pick up, it explodes into a hurricane. A storm of monstrous force descends. Visibility drops to 0. The whiteout begins. A state where the sky and the ground merge into a single milky canvas. The horizon disappears, all landmarks vanish. The tracks they left on the way up, their only map home, are buried by snow in seconds. The descending groups are like blind kittens in the eye of the storm. On the vast plateau of the South Col, a drama of disorientation unfolds. A group of climbers loses its way just a few hundred meters from the tents of their camp. They wander through the white chaos until their strength gives out completely. They huddle together, trying to share warmth, while salvation lies so close, yet is hidden by a wall of snow. Higher up the slope, the situation becomes critical. Rob Hall, one of the most experienced guides, refuses to abandon his client, Doug Hansen, who is completely exhausted. They are stranded near the south summit, too high to survive the night. Scott Fisher, a man of iron constitution, suddenly loses all ability to move. He simply sits down on the ridge during his descent, his energy gone. The storm is hitting on all fronts. On the other side of the mountain, on the North Ridge, 3 climbers from an Indian expedition are dying in the very same storm. And then, the worst thing happens. The hissing in the masks goes quiet. The oxygen tanks run empty, one by one. The oxygen is gone. Now, these people are left to face the storm alone, in a frozen void at the very edge of human endurance, deprived of their most vital resource. Even the strongest people on the planet are forced to retreat from this wall of wind. The Sherpas, the elite of high-altitude mountaineering, try to push through the blizzard to help the lost climbers. They leave their tents, but the storm literally forces them back inside. The wind is so dense you can lean into it at a sharp angle. The rescue operation is snuffed out almost as soon as it begins. Camp 4 sinks into a heavy silence, broken only by the roar of nylon in the wind. But on the morning of May 11th, the radio crackles to life. Through the static, the voice of Rob Hall breaks through. He's impossibly high, near the south summit. He survived the night in the open, but his situation is desperate. Base camp connects him via satellite phone to his home. What follows is one of the most heartbreaking conversations in the history of mountaineering. Hall says goodbye to his wife, trying to sound calm so as not to frighten her, though he knows perfectly well there is no way down for him. Meanwhile, on the South Col, as the wind eases slightly, rescuers finally find the lost group. the scene before them presents a brutal choice. It's battlefield triage in outer space. Those who can still move are pulled to their feet and led toward the tents. But two climbers, Beck Weathers and a Japanese woman, Yasuko Namba, are lying motionless, covered in a crust of ice. They are assessed as beyond hope. The decision is swift and pragmatic. Trying to save them would mean losing those who could still walk. They are left where they lie, among the rocks and snow. But sometimes, human will defies medical prognosis. A few hours later, the impossible happens. One of the dead begins to move. Beck Weathers regains consciousness. He is blind, his hands are frozen solid, and he has spent a full day in the death zone without shelter. But some primal instinct gets him to his feet. Staggering like a ghost, he stumbles alone toward the camp and literally falls into a tent, to the astonishment of his teammates. For the others, there is no miracle. Higher up the slope, another group finds Scott Fisher. The legendary guide is sitting on the ridge, but there is no one left to save. The mountain has claimed him forever. The tragedy spans the entire massif. On the other side, on the north ridge, 3 climbers from the Indian expedition have perished. By the time the storm finally recedes, the toll is clear. In a single day, Everest has claimed 8 lives. The final act of this drama plays out under the blades of a helicopter. A pilot makes a landing on the very edge of aerodynamics, plucking the survivors with the most severe injuries directly from the slope. The bodies of the dead remain there, at altitude, becoming permanent markers for future climbers. This May storm becomes a turning point. The world realizes that even big money and the best guides are no guarantee of a safe return, and the rules of commercial climbing begin to be rewritten. Tragedy number 4. The deadly queue at the summit. May 2019. The Nepalese government issues a record 381 climbing permits for a single season. Everest is expecting a crowd. Commercial expeditions from 24 countries set up their camps, clients train, Sherpas prep the gear, and then the sky clears. The only short weather window of the entire month. 5, maybe 6 days for a summit push. It's all or nothing. And everyone goes at once, May 22nd, at an altitude of over 8,500 meters, the southeast ridge. Here, on the approach to the summit, where there's barely enough oxygen for a single breath, a line forms. A real, living queue of people in brightly colored jackets, clinging to a fixed rope. Hundreds of climbers are standing in the death zone, the name for anything above 8,000 meters, waiting their turn for the final stretch. They wait for hours. They move by inches. They freeze when someone ahead stumbles or changes an oxygen bottle. Nirmal Purja, a Nepalese climber, takes out his camera and snaps a picture. The photo shows a line of people snaking upwards, like a queue for the last bus of the night. Except, this isn't a bus stop. This is the edge of the world. The photo goes viral in a day, but the deaths begin even before the picture becomes a sensation. May 22nd, 2 dead. The 23rd, 5 more, then more and more. 11 people in 10 days. The altitude, the exhaustion, the lack of oxygen, the delays turn the summit push into a game of roulette. The season ends in scandal, a revision of the rules, and questions with no answers. This is the story of how Everest became a traffic jam. Let's rewind a few weeks. April 2019. Everest Base Camp has become a sprawling tent city. Hundreds of bright domes on the Khumbu Icefall, generators humming, people acclimatizing. The Nepalese government issues 381 permits, an all-time record. $11,000 for the permit, plus guides, plus Sherpas. Nearly 1,000 people are planning to summit one mountain in one short season. Robin Fisher, a British climber, looks at the crowd in base camp and realizes, this is too much. He writes on Instagram, delays at altitude can be fatal. He posts this a week before his summit push. No one pays attention. Meteorologists keep a close eye on the jet stream. The wind usually hammers the summit at 200 kilometers per hour. In the spring, it sometimes shifts, opening a window for a few days. The forecast points to the end of May. After that, the monsoon hits, and the season is over. The teams are waiting for the signal. On May 20th, confirmation arrives. The window opens on the 22nd and will hold until the 25th. 4 days max. Expedition leaders announce their departure, some for the evening of the 21st, others for the night of the 22nd. There's no coordination between the companies. Everyone is on their own. On the evening of May 21st, hundreds of silhouettes form a chain leading up from Camp 4. The altitude is 7,900 meters, the temperature is minus 30 degrees, and headlamps carve a path of light upwards. Oxygen masks hiss with every breath. Narrow sections force a slow pace, but for now, it's just a dense flow of people. Morning, May 22nd. The sky is clear, the wind has died down. Perfect conditions, and everyone knows it. Hundreds of climbers are moving at the same time, 8,790 meters. The section near the former Hillary Step. Before the 2015 earthquake, this was a nearly vertical 12-meter rock face. It collapsed, but a narrow passage remains. The rope goes steeply up. Every step is a pull on a jumar. Someone up ahead freezes, changing a cylinder, trying to catch their breath, lungs gasping for air like a fish out of water. The next person stops, then another. A queue. Nirmal Purja, a Nepalese mountaineer and former Gurkha, is ascending at this moment and sees a scene unlike anything even in the busiest seasons. Brightly colored jackets stretch for hundreds of meters up the slope. He takes out his camera. The shot captures about 300 people. He would later write, around 320 in the queue. The problem isn't the inconvenience. Above 8,000 meters, the body begins to die. The lungs don't get enough oxygen. The brain operates at half capacity. The heart is pushed to its limit. Each person carries 2 or 3 oxygen cylinders, enough for a 12-hour ascent and descent, with a minimal reserve for unexpected delays. But these delays are measured in hours. People are standing still, freezing, and their oxygen is running out. One cylinder, then the second. The queue crawls forward. Someone loses their coordination. A guide helps them move. Another stop. Donald Cash, a 55-year-old American from Utah. He reaches the summit, the dream of a lifetime, a selfie on top of the world. He starts his descent. At 8,760 meters, his body shuts down. Sherpas perform chest compressions, give him oxygen, and support him on the way down. His body doesn't respond. Anjali Kulkarni from India. Altitude, 8,400 meters, exhaustion growing with every hour of waiting. The collapse is swift. A person simply slumps onto the slope. Resuscitation at this altitude is nearly impossible. May 22nd claims 2 lives. May 23rd is the peak of the disaster. On the south side, there are 3 casualties. Nihal Bhagwan at 7,900 meters, Kalpana Dash at 8,400. On the north side, 2 more die. Kevin Hines from Ireland and Ernst Landgraf from Austria. The northern route is also overcrowded. That same day, Purya posts the photo on Instagram. Within hours, the image explodes online. Global media outlets pick it up. Traffic jam on Everest, the death queue. The photograph becomes an icon. A line at 8,500 meters, looking like a checkout queue at a supermarket. Except here, the price of waiting is your life. By the evening of the 23rd, 7 people are dead. But the season isn't over. The weather window is holding, and groups continue their summit pushes. On May 24th, Dhruba Bista, a Nepalese guide, dies. Altitude, 7,100 meters. On May 25th, it's Robin Fisher, the very same British climber who had warned about this on Instagram. Altitude, 8,700 meters on his descent from the summit. His post is now read like a prophecy. Delays could prove fatal. He was right, and he became a victim of the very thing he wrote about. May 27th, Christopher Coolish from the United States. Altitude, 7,900 meters. The 11th, the last. 11 deaths spread over 10 days of one short window. 9 on the south side, 2 on the north. Different countries, different levels of experience, different routes. But they all share one common denominator: an overcrowded mountain during a very short window of opportunity. The world's media links the deaths to the queues. The headlines are direct. Everest traffic jam claims lives. Delays in the death zone prove fatal. Purya's viral photo circulates everywhere, visual proof of the absurdity. The mountaineering community is divided. Some blame the commercial companies for bringing too many inexperienced clients, selling them a dream for a price without a real assessment of their abilities. Others point to the system. Nepal depends on tourism. Everest brings in millions, and no one is interested in limiting the flow. The main factors in the deaths are cautiously worded: hypoxia, exhaustion, delays at critical altitude. But no single official cause is established for all 11 cases. Each death is a separate incident with its own circumstances. The common denominator is overcrowding, but legally, it's not a single disaster. It's a series of tragic coincidences. The 2019 season changes Everest forever. The mountain is no longer just a symbol of ultimate human achievement. Now, it's also a symbol of what happens when a dream becomes a commodity, and the top of the world becomes a business with a Q. Tragedy number 5. The vanished snowboarder, the summit descent. A man stands on top of the world, straps into his snowboard, and vanishes into the clouds, forever. Marco Siffredi was a man who did what others thought was impossible. He became the first person in history to make a complete snowboard descent of Mount Everest. The entire mountaineering world applauded this incredible achievement. It seemed like the summit was conquered, history was written, and he could walk away a winner. But for Marco, the mountains weren't just a sport, they were an obsession. Exactly 1 year later, he was back. This time, his goal was even more ambitious, more dangerous: the legendary and terrifying Hornbein Couloir. On September 8, 2002, Marco was once again on the peak. Below his feet, a thick blanket of clouds stretched out. He didn't hesitate. The snowboarder pushed off and began to glide down into the great unknown. Observers at base camp watched intently through their binoculars. They could see him carving the slope with confidence. A clean track from his board stretched across the snow. But then, they lost sight of him. Marco rode into a white void, and just like that, visual contact was lost. From that moment on, there was only silence. No one ever saw him or his board again. Everest had claimed its hero, leaving us with one of the greatest mysteries in the history of the high mountains. But to understand what force compelled him to step into that white void, we need to rewind. Because this story doesn't begin in the Himalayas, but in Chamonix, France, a place where people are born with a love for altitude and risk. Marco Siffredi was a product of these mountains. He grew up among granite peaks and glaciers, and from a young age, he chose a snowboard as his weapon. In 1999, Marco made a name for himself. He challenged the Mont Blanc face on the Aiguille Verte. It's a near vertical wall of ice where a single mistake means death, but he flew down the route with incredible ease. The climbing world was stunned. This wasn't just a daredevil, he was a true virtuoso. However, the Alps quickly started to feel like a sandbox to him. Marco craved something more. By 2000, he was in the Himalayas, testing himself on the 8,000er Cho Oyu. A successful descent confirmed that his physical condition and technique were solid enough for extreme altitudes. Then came May 23, 2001. Marco was on the summit of Everest. He had ascended via the North Col, using oxygen to keep his mind sharp for the main event. Ahead of him lay the Norton Couloir. Marco began his descent. He rode down with technical skill and grace, etching his name into history as the first person to complete a full snowboard descent from the top of the world. It was an absolute triumph. You'd think the dream was fulfilled. But while the world was applauding, Marco himself felt a strange emptiness. For him, the Norton Couloir wasn't steep enough. It was too snowy, too easy. Right there, at the foot of the mountain, in his moment of glory, he was already looking elsewhere. His gaze was fixed on the route next to it, the ominous and steep Hornbein Couloir. That, in his mind, was the real challenge, and it was this thirst for true extremity that brought him back. A year passes, and the games are over. September 8, 2002. Marco is on the slope again, but this time, the stakes are as high as they get. With him are experienced Sherpas, responsible for the ascent and the group's safety. They're making their summit push along the North Ridge. The conditions are brutal. This isn't the packed snow of spring. It's autumn, a period of unstable post-monsoon weather. The climbers are literally breaking trail, sinking up to their chests in loose snow. Every few meters is a struggle. Just to stay functional and not collapse from hypoxia, the group is on oxygen. They only reach the summit around 2 in the afternoon. On Everest, this is critically late. Any guide will tell you that by this hour, you should already be on your way down. But Marco isn't in a hurry. A strange, almost mystical scene unfolds on the peak. Above the climbers' heads, the sky is piercingly clear and sunny. But below, where he needs to ride, a sea of clouds is raging. Every gorge is choked with thick white cotton. Marco stands on the edge and waits. 10 minutes pass, then 20, then an hour. He's hoping for a window to open, a chance to see his route, that very hornbeam couloir leading to a camp at 5,800 meters. But the clouds don't part. Time is running out. The oxygen in their tanks isn't infinite, and neither is the daylight. Marco makes a decision. He straps in. From this moment, their paths diverge. The Sherpas, shaking their heads, begin their descent on foot back down the familiar route, while a lone figure on a snowboard glides in the opposite direction, straight into the white veil of the hornbeam couloir. Down at base camp, people are glued to their binoculars. The tension is palpable. They catch every movement of the tiny dot on the mountain. Through breaks in the clouds, they can see him. He's riding. A sharp, confident track cuts through the snow. He descends lower and lower still. The track reaches an altitude of 8,600 meters. And then, for no apparent reason, the line just stops. Visual contact is lost. The mountain swallows Marco, and he never reappears in their lenses again. When rescuers and experts began to analyze the point where the track vanished at 8,600 meters, the situation became even more terrifying. Logic suggests that if someone disappears, they must have fallen, but maps and the Sherpa's experience say otherwise. In this specific area, the slope has no giant crevasses capable of swallowing a person whole. The terrain here is deceptively solid. Moreover, a disaster usually leaves a signature. If he had fallen, there would be chaotic gashes in the snow. If an avalanche had occurred, the slope would be churned up. If a binding had broken, we would have found something: a glove, a piece of plastic, a hat. But the area was perfectly sterilely clean. No signs of a struggle with the elements, no debris. The snow lay in a smooth, untouched sheet. The searches yielded nothing. Marco Siffredi's body was never found. The great mountain simply erased him from reality. The official documents only deepen the chilling sense of finality. In the authoritative American Alpine Journal, next to his name, it doesn't say death or accident. There is just one dry, soul-freezing word: disappearance. No clarifications, no details. The autumn of 2002 will forever be remembered in history as the season of this one, great tragedy. Of course, people speculate. They talk about a sudden gust of wind, a hidden trap beneath the snow. But it's all just smoke. The one hard fact remains. There is a track that leads to nowhere. Everest remains silent, leaving us with one of the most haunting and unexplained mysteries in the history of high-altitude mountaineering. Tragedy number 6, the 8th attempt. Imagine a climber attempting to summit Everest with only one fully intact finger. Nobukazu Kuriki was a true media sensation in Japan. Thousands of people followed his every move on their smartphone screens. From the very beginning, he framed his climbs as a media project. He went solo, without supplemental oxygen, throwing down a challenge to nature itself. But take a closer look at his hands. His thick mittens hide a harsh truth. The brutal cold of 2012 cost him 9 of his fingers. For a normal person, this would be the end of their mountaineering career. But Kuriki saw it as just another level of difficulty. To him, it wasn't an injury. It was a new challenge. May 2018. This is his 8th attempt to conquer the top of the world. He's back up there, where the air is thin to the point of non-existence. There's nothing around him but ice, wind, and the camera he uses to regularly check in with his followers. He enters the zone where the human body slowly begins to die without extra oxygen. His audience is waiting for a triumphant video from the summit, but the mountain has a very different ending in store. This is a chronicle of how limitless human perseverance collides with the icy indifference of high altitude. But let's figure out who this guy really was. Nobukazu Kuriki was a unique character. He wasn't just some hardcore climber in a puffy jacket. He was also a savvy entrepreneur. He understood one crucial thing: It's not enough to just climb a mountain, you have to sell the story beautifully. His thing was solo, no oxygen ascents. Imagine, no mask to help you breathe at an altitude where airplanes fly. And most importantly, he broadcasted live, straight from the slopes. At first, everything went according to plan. In the late 2000s, Kuriki claimed a sense of Cho-Oyu and Dhaulagiri, though even these successes were later questioned by the professional community. Kuriki built a perfect image for himself as a lone hero. But in the tight-knit world of professional climbers, he was viewed with suspicion. Why? Because there were questions about his records. For example, his claimed success on Manaslu in 2008. He said he was there, but many experts don't believe him. There's a lack of proof, and that ascent is still considered controversial. And the pros had major issues with his solo style. Kuriki told everyone, "I'm climbing alone." But experienced guides saw something else. A whole team went with him. Sherpas carried his gear, and camera operators filmed him. The professional community started whispering that this wasn't sport, it was just a well-produced deception for his audience. But Kuriki ignored the critics and just kept doing his thing. Until 2012. Another attempt on Everest ended in a nightmare. The cold cut straight to the bone, and his body gave out. The doctor's verdict was brutal. Severe frostbite. They had to amputate parts of 9 of his fingers. Just think about that. A climber with almost nothing left to grip the icy rocks. At that moment, a very difficult scene played out. His father, seeing his son's mutilated hands, didn't speak of heroic deeds. He uttered a simple but terrifying phrase, "The main thing is that you survived." It seemed like this was the end, a sign that it was time to stop. But for Kuriki, losing his fingers wasn't a stop sign. It was new fuel for his show. He decided to prove to everyone that he could reach the summit even like this. And so, we fast forward to the spring of 2018. Nepal. For Kuriki, this trip had become a true obsession. Just think about that. This was his 8th attempt to reach the summit. His 8th. The previous 3 years, from 2015 to 2017, had been nothing but a string of failures. One moment, the weather wrecks your plans. The next, it's a natural disaster. It's as if the mountain was pushing him back, time and time again. But here he is again, back at the base. The plan is the same, and it's as tough as it gets, to climb the roof of the world without supplemental oxygen. Base camp is buzzing with life. Kuriki is constantly surrounded by a film crew and a support team. Cameras, gear, people. Everything is ready for the broadcast. Kuriki is betting big on publicity. For him, social media has become as vital a tool as his ice axe. He's always online, posting updates, chatting with fans, making his followers feel like they're right there with him. His audience sees a confident hero, chasing his dream. But behind the upbeat posts, a terrifying reality lurks. One he's about to face, all alone. The radio at base camp crackles to life. But instead of a cheerful report for his subscribers, the team hears a chilling, raspy voice. Kuriki makes it to an altitude of 7,400 meters. This is the area of Camp 3, an elevation where every single step is a monumental effort. And here, in the middle of this icy wasteland, his body starts to give out. There's no heroic music, no beautiful scenery for the vlog. There is only pain. Nobukazu gets on the radio and tells his team he's in trouble. He's racked by a severe cough, and every movement is agony. In that moment, common sense wins out over ambition. He makes the only call he can, to call off the summit push. Kuriki turns around. He announces that he's starting his descent to save his life. Down below, the team breathes a sigh of relief. The worst is over. He's coming back. But the mountain has other plans. Immediately after that message, the radio goes silent. The connection is lost. At first, everyone assumes it's just a technical glitch, a dead battery, or maybe the terrain is blocking the signal. But hours pass, and the radio remains silent. The anxiety in the camp grows with every passing minute. Sherpas and members of the support team immediately head up. They follow his tracks, scanning the white slope, hoping to spot a familiar figure who's just tired and sitting down to rest. On the 21st of May, 2018, the search ends. The Sherpas find a tent. It's pitched on the slope, fluttering in the wind. Inside lies Nobukazu Kuriki. He is dead. And this is where the confusion begins, raising questions that persist to this day. Different sources report different altitudes where the body was found. Some say it was at that same 7,400 meters. Others claim he managed to descend lower to 6,400. But for him, it no longer matters. The scene the rescuers find is nothing like a movie drama. There are no signs of an avalanche or a fall into a crevasse. The official cause of death is blunt and terrifying: hypothermia. His body, weakened by the cough and the exertion, simply stopped producing heat. He died of exposure in his own tent, trying to escape the cold that ultimately proved stronger than his will. The story of the man who wanted to conquer the summit ends in silence on its slope. While rescuers figure out how to bring the body down, news of the tragedy spreads faster than the wind. Kuriki's death instantly makes headlines at all the major news agencies. The world's biggest media outlets cover the tragedy. Journalists latch on to the most dramatic detail of his biography, the fingers he lost back in 2012. To the public, it's a beautiful, tragic story of a hero with a disability who defied the odds and lost. Everyone talks about his incredible courage and the cruelty of the mountains. But within the tight-knit community of professional climbers, the conversation takes a very different turn. Right after the funeral, heated debates erupt. People are once again asking that uncomfortable question: what exactly is solo? Can you really call a climb a solo ascent if you're constantly on the radio, with a whole team waiting for you below, with hot tea and a first aid kit? Kuriki's death forces the community to reconsider the old rules. Many argue that the concept of solitude has simply vanished in the age of the internet and live streaming. And then, the strangest detail of this story emerges. Usually, after such high-profile tragedies, there's a thorough post-mortem. Experts analyze the mistakes, check the equipment, and create detailed timelines. But in Kuriki's case, there is only silence. No public technical investigation is ever conducted. To this day, we don't know exactly what happened during those final hours in the tent. The timeline breaks off at his last radio call. No hour-by-hour account, no medical reports, no detailed debriefs ever appeared. His death remains a black box, one that was never fully opened for the public. All that's left is speculation. Did his gear fail? Was it a fatal miscalculation? Or did his body simply shut down from the strain? Ultimately, Nobukazu Kuriki leaves behind a complicated legacy. He will forever be remembered in history, not as the most technical athlete, but as a symbol of otherworldly perseverance. He shows us what the human will is capable of, when the drive to reach a goal overrides the instinct for self-preservation. And at the same time, he becomes a stark example of media mountaineering, a new era where an audience's attention becomes an additional risk factor, one that sometimes comes with the ultimate price. Tragedy number 7. Death by stolen food. Vitor is standing on top of the world, with no idea he only has a few hours to live. He has just become the first Brazilian to conquer Everest without using bottled oxygen. It's a historic moment, the absolute peak of his career. But the joy of this victory is short-lived, because the disaster had already begun far below. In one of the high-altitude camps, Vitor discovered his cache had been ransacked. Someone had stolen his food and gear, leaving him vulnerable in the death zone. Instead of resting, he had to scramble to solve logistical problems. Despite the stress and the disruption to his plan, he pushes on. He wins the race to the top, but loses the battle on the way down. His body can't handle the strain. Rescuers find him still alive, but there's nothing they can do. The record-setting ascent is immediately followed by a total collapse. To understand why this setback becomes a catastrophe, you need to look at the man challenging the mountain. Vitor Negrete is no mere tourist with deep pockets, buying his way to the summit. He's a pro, with the mindset of a scientist. In his regular life, he's affiliated with the Unicamp, working in food engineering. He's used to calculating calories, workloads, and risks with laboratory precision. But his real laboratory is a place where the average person wouldn't survive a day. Vitor tests himself in adventure races, cycling through wild parts of the Amazon. He doesn't build his career alone. His longtime climbing partner, Rodrigo Raineri, is almost always by his side. Together, they move like a single, well-oiled machine. The Andes become their training ground. Aconcagua, the highest peak in South America, is a mountain they've already mastered, but they always choose the hardest routes. In 2002, Negrete climbs its south face, a vertical route considered elite even among professionals. 2 years later, he returns to climb it in winter, when the mountain transforms into an icy fortress. These climbs are just training for the main event. In June of 2005, Vitor is already standing on the summit of Everest. That ascent was with a Brazilian team, and he used oxygen tanks. It would seem the goal was achieved, a good time to stop. But for Negrete, using supplemental oxygen feels like a half measure. He needs to find out where the true limit of human capability lies. In 2006, he returns to the Himalayas with a plan that would make most people's skin crawl. He chooses the north face from the Tibetan side, a route notorious for its brutal winds and harsh conditions. But the main condition is one he sets for himself: no supplemental oxygen. And this time, he's making the summit push alone. He deliberately gives up the safety net of an oxygen mask and enters a zone where every step is paid for with colossal willpower. On May 16th, Vitor reaches Camp 2 on the north face. He's exhausted from the difficult traverse and is counting on a well-deserved rest. He knows he has a cache here, a supply of food, and a reliable tent. It's his island of safety, his primary resource for recovery. But when Negrete reaches the spot, he finds nothing. His cache has been plundered. Someone, another climber or a high-altitude porter, took everything: his shelter, his food, his fuel. At this altitude, every ounce of weight and every calorie counts. Losing the cache means losing the chance to recover. Vitor is deprived of the food, shelter, and rest that were planned before his summit push. Instead of sleeping and building up his strength, he's forced to burn energy on basic survival tasks. Other climbers come to his aid. They share their food, let him stay in their tents, but the logic of his preparation is already shattered. The stress and extra hassle at this altitude burn through the body's reserves faster than any physical exertion. His logistics are in shambles, but Vitor seems to ignore the warning signs. He decides not to retreat. On May 17th, he climbs even higher, to the high assault camp at around 8,300 meters. This is the death zone, plain and simple. Your body doesn't recover here. It just slowly shuts down, even if you're just lying in a sleeping bag. Vitor spends a few hours here, preparing to set out. It's 11 p.m. All around is impenetrable darkness and a piercing cold. At this hour, normal people are asleep. But for a summit push, the night is the only window to work with. Negrete straps on his crampons and steps out of the tent into the icy void. His partner, Rodrigo Raineri, is on the same expedition, but right now, Vitor is completely alone. No one is watching his back. Most importantly, there is no oxygen mask on his face. He's breathing in the frigid, thin air, which contains a dangerously low amount of oxygen. Every step is a struggle. He begins his ascent toward the summit, carrying the fatigue from the theft at the lower camp, and a goal so ambitious it allows for no weakness. On May 18th, Vitor stands on the summit and etches his name into the history books, the first Brazilian to do it without bottled oxygen. The record is set. It seems the impossible has been done, and all that's left is the journey home. But on the descent, the system fails. Around 6 in the evening, the radio in the camp crackles to life, and Negrete's voice sounds nothing like a victor's. He's at an altitude of 8,600 meters, and he's asking for help. For a climber of his caliber, admitting defeat is the absolute last resort. It means his body's resources aren't just depleted, they've gone into a deep deficit. He's still on his feet, but his body is starting to shut down its life support systems, one by one. Sherpas are sent up to meet him. It's a race against time in a zone where any delay is fatal. They find Vitor 100 meters lower, at the 8,500-meter mark. His condition is critical. The rescuers do what Negrete had avoided for the purity of his record. They give him oxygen and water, but the altitude has already triggered irreversible processes. The Sherpas practically drag him down, fighting against gravity and exhaustion. They manage a small miracle. They get him to the tent at Camp 3 at 8,300 meters, alive. It seems the worst is over. He's in shelter, he's breathing, he has people around him. But inside his body, a silent catastrophe is unfolding. During the night, Vitor starts having severe spasms. These are signs that his lungs or brain are filling with fluid. High-altitude sickness is entering its terminal stage. His body, exhausted from the previous days and the summit push, simply can't find the energy to fight back. In the morning, on May 19th, the tent on the slopes of Everest falls silent. Vitor Negreit's life comes to an end, never having made it back down to the foot of the mountain that gave him an eternal record and took everything else. Death at this altitude is silent, but down below, it instantly turns into a roar of media noise. On May 19th, the very same day Vitor's heart stops, the news hits Brazil like a shockwave. The media is flooded with headlines. For millions, it's a shock. The national hero who had just achieved the impossible is not coming home. Rodrigo Raineri, his constant partner, is there on the expedition. He is faced with the hardest role of all, to witness the end. Just a few hours after the body is brought down, he officially confirms his friend's death. At that moment, the expedition that was meant to be a celebration of sport definitively becomes a funeral procession. Later, experts begin to dissect the story, piece by piece, trying to understand exactly where things went wrong. In the reports, that same incident with the theft at Camp 2 comes up again. Officially, the stolen gear and food aren't named as the direct cause of death. The medical report uses dry terms: high-altitude sickness, edema, exhaustion. But anyone who knows the mountains understands, the theft became the invisible weight that pulled the climber down. The loss of calories and the stress before the final push took away that crucial percentage of strength that might have made the difference between life and death. The darkest part of this story is that the culprits remain shadows. The identities of those who looted the cache were never established. There are no security cameras or police on the mountain. The people whose actions at that altitude robbed another man of his chance of survival simply dissolve among the other expeditions, unpunished. Vitor Negreit's name doesn't fade away. In the academic world where he began his journey as a researcher, facilities are named in his honor. A book of memoirs is published, chronicling his path. And most importantly, his athletic achievement remains unshakable. Despite the fatal end, the record is officially recognized. Vitor Negrete is forever written into history as the first Brazilian to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. The mountain took his life, but it couldn't take his victory. Tragedy number 8. The plunge into the abyss, a cornice collapse. To summit Everest is only half the battle. The real challenge is to get back down. British climber Daniel Patterson is on the summit, celebrating his victory, but beneath his feet lies a death trap. One step onto a fragile snow cornice, and he, along with his guide, vanishes into the abyss in front of the entire group. In an instant, triumph turns into silent tragedy. Let's rewind the tape, just a few hours before the snow gives way beneath their feet. Who are these people, frozen in these last happy photographs? Daniel Patterson is just a solid guy from Wakefield. He's 40 years old, and back on the ground, he's a businessman. He owns a CrossFit gym. He's not a professional mountaineer who lives in a tent year-round. He's a commercial client. That means he saves up money, trains at the gym, and buys a spot on an expedition to fulfill a lifelong dream. For him, Everest is the ultimate trophy, a goal he's been working towards for years. He has successful climbs on his resume, but Everest is a whole different league. To ensure this dream doesn't become his last, he's paired with a man who knows the mountains better than city streets. His guide is Paz Tenji Sherpa. He's only 23 years old. In normal life, he's just a young man. But up here, at this altitude, he's the senior. He works for a company called 8K Expeditions. It's a huge machine for getting people to the summit. Their group has about 15 people. But on the slope, the only thing that matters is the person you're roped to. Pace Tenji is a professional. Just a year ago, in 2023, he completed special rescue courses. He knows how to provide aid and has experience on difficult peaks like Amadablam and Lobouche. He's the one who forges the path and fixes the ropes. But there's a detail in his personal file that feels unsettling now. If you open his official profile, you might notice a strange clerical error. In the experience section, someone accidentally typed in ascents dated for 2025. A simple typo that now looks like a dark omen, a plan for a future that, for him, would never come. These two, the businessman with a dream and the young pro with an ice axe, are tied together by a single rope. Daniel puts his complete trust in his guide, and Paz Tenji is doing his job. They move upward, confident in their training and gear, unaware that the greatest danger lies not in their skills, but in the very terrain they believe to be a solid foundation. On May 21st, at 8,000 meters, the air is worth more than gold. It's early morning. The sun is just beginning to light up the slopes, but here, in the so-called death zone, time flows differently. The human body doesn't recover at this altitude. It slowly deteriorates with every passing minute. And in this extreme setting, what's unfolding isn't a heroic solo ascent, but a full-blown traffic jam. This season, the mountain has given climbers a very short weather window, just a couple of days when the wind dies down enough to attempt the summit. Because of this, a gigantic bottleneck has formed on the route. Hundreds of people are moving along the path at the same time, some up, some already down, creating a jam on the narrow ridge. This place is like a knife's edge, a chasm to the left, a chasm to the right, and a thin path in between where two people can't pass. Daniel and Paz Tenji have already done the main thing. They've been to the summit. Now their task is simple: get down. But the descent turns into a test of patience. Imagine a line at a supermarket checkout, only it's minus 30 degrees and any careless move could be your last. People are standing shoulder to shoulder. Some are going up, some are coming down. To let others pass, you have to step aside, off the beaten path, and onto the loose, untouched snow. And right here lies the main trap, one that's invisible to the naked eye. Visually, this snow looks like a reliable extension of the slope. It appears solid and safe, but climbers call these formations cornices. They are ledges of snow, sculpted by the wind. Essentially, it's an overhanging snow shelf with no support underneath. What people are standing on is not rock, but compressed air and an icy crust hanging over the Kangshung face, a sheer drop that plunges for kilometers down towards Tibet. By this point, a critical mass of people has gathered on the cornice. Everyone is tired, their focus dulled by the euphoria of the summit and the lack of oxygen. The group moves slowly, step by step, in a slow-motion rhythm. No one hears a crack, no one feels a vibration. Just hundreds of kilograms of human weight pressing down on a fragile snow shelf that's ready to give way. Morning is already approaching what counts as midday at this altitude. Suddenly, the silence is broken, not by a scream, but by a deep, heavy thud. In a single second, the solid ground beneath their feet is gone. The snow cornice, crowded with people, simply breaks off from the mountain like a piece of dry plaster. It happens instantly. Gravity gives no time to think. Several people are pulled down at once towards Tibet, straight onto the Kangshung face. It's one of the most terrifying walls on Everest, a sheer drop where you can fall for kilometers. But then, a miracle happens. For most, the fall ends after a couple of meters with a sharp jolt. The ropes pull taut like strings. Some people are held not by the system, but by the fact they were clipped in below the break line. They hang over the abyss, legs dangling in the void, choking with panic. But they are alive. They begin to scramble back up, frantically digging their crampons into the ice. However, two of them don't stop. Daniel Patterson and Paz Tenji Sherpa keep sliding down. The witnesses on the ridge freeze in horror. Why didn't their safety gear hold them? That's the main question of that minute. Perhaps, in the chaos of trying to get around the traffic jam, they had unclipped for a second to step over a rope. Or maybe the anchor was ripped out by the weight of the collapsing snow. In this chaos, it's hard to make out the details, but the fact remains. They have passed the point of no return. It all lasts for a few moments. The silhouettes of the two men grow smaller and smaller until they finally dissolve into the white haze of the east face. They simply vanish from view, leaving the others on the ridge in a state of shock. From the moment the two disappear into the white mist, their status changes. Now, in official reports next to the names Patterson and Paz Tenji, there's a short chilling note: missing. Down below, in base camp, and in faraway London, people are waiting for helicopters, for rescue teams, for a miracle. But Nepal's response is as sharp as the crack of a whip. A rescue operation is practically impossible. Why can't they just go down and find them? The thing is, the geography here is just brutal. They aren't falling on the Nepalese side, where there are at least some established trails. They plummet down the Kangshung face. Picture a sheer drop of 3 kilometers. It's a vertical wall of ice, almost impossible to even approach. But for their families, impossible just isn't an answer. Back in Britain, the tragedy instantly hits the headlines. The disappearance of a CrossFit gym owner and his young guide is all anyone can talk about. Their family and friends refuse to believe the worst. They launch a GoFundMe. Donations pour in from all over the world to fund private helicopters, drones, the best tech available. It's a desperate attempt to buy a sliver of hope in a place where money is meaningless. They cling to the belief that Daniel and Pas Tenji are just stranded on a ledge somewhere, alive, waiting for rescue. But the experts looking at the drone and satellite footage can only shake their heads. They point to the cause, the line. The photos show dozens of climbers lined up on that exact same cornice, just waiting for their turn to move. A snow cornice like that simply isn't built to handle that kind of load. It's like a crowd of people stepping out onto a balcony held up by nothing but icicles. The mountain doesn't forgive crowds. The story ends in silence. All the money and technology in the world can't find a single trace of them. Their bodies are never recovered. There are no exact coordinates for where they fell. The Kangshung face holds its secrets close, and so Daniel and his guide remain there, frozen in the moment their time ran out. Somewhere in the endless snow, suspended between heaven and earth. On the border of two nations, a place where the living are forbidden to tread. Tragedy number 9. The vanished professor. A step into the void. He's standing at the highest point on the planet, and he doesn't yet know that the descent ahead is where the price of a mistake is absolute. Shay Lawless isn't a professional mountaineer or an adrenaline junkie living for the rush. He's just a professor from Dublin's Trinity College, a man of science, numbers, and intelligent systems. For him, climbing Everest is simply an ambitious task, one he's tackling with the same methodical approach he uses to write research papers or lecture his students. This is his personal challenge for his 40th birthday. Shay executes his plan perfectly. On the 16th of May, he reaches the summit, takes a photo, and begins his descent. He's surrounded by other members of the expedition, experienced guides, and a well-oiled logistics machine. It seems like the hardest part is over. After all, gravity is on your side now. But in the death zone, the rules can change in an instant. On the way down, something inexplicable happens. At some point, Shay simply disappears. No one sees him fall. No one hears a cry. He literally vanishes into the white silence of the mountain at an altitude of over 8,000 meters. Just a couple of hours earlier, he was a triumphant hero who had fulfilled a lifelong dream and a charitable mission. Now, he becomes a part of the eternal ice. This is a story about the thin line that separates absolute success from complete silence, and how the mountain claims its victors, leaving them no chance to even say goodbye. In Dublin, he's known as a man who speaks the language of numbers. On a typical Tuesday, you wouldn't find Seamus Lawless on a sheer rock face, but in a quiet lecture hall at Trinity College. Here, he's a respected assistant professor and an expert in artificial intelligence. His world is one of predictable algorithms, logic, and data that can always be double-checked. But inside this academic calm, a clock is ticking. Shay is about to turn 40. For many, that's just a reason to buy an expensive car. But for Lawless, it's a milestone. He sets himself a goal that defies all computer logic, to climb to the roof of the world. It's important to understand, Shay is not a professional climber. He doesn't live in a tent for years on end or make a living by taking risks. He's a client, a member of a commercial expedition. That means he pays for professionals to pave his way, carry his oxygen, and provide a safety net every step of the way. But even in a commercial group, everyone has to be prepared to rely on themselves first and foremost. And Shay prepares. He's no naive tourist who decided to take a stroll up Everest from his couch. 2 years before that fateful spring, he begins his marathon. First, a warm-up in the Himalayas, Mera Peak and Island Peak. Altitudes over 6,000 meters, where the air already starts to feel like poison. He summits them successfully. But he passes his real test in 2018. Alaska, Mount Denali. It's the planet's freezer, a place that tests your character to its core. Shay conquers that peak. This success gives him a false sense of confidence. If he could do it there, he's ready for the final boss. His project gets a grand name, Ireland on Everest. It's no longer just a personal whim, but a mission. He raises money for the Barrettstown Charity Fund to help others. Back home, his wife Pamela and his family are watching. They see it as a sporting challenge, a noble cause. None of them yet realize that his experience in Alaska and his successful training in the Himalayas are just part of an equation where, on Everest, there are far too many unknown variables. Shay heads to the mountain, confident that his meticulous preparation can mitigate the risk. But at 8,000 meters, math just stops working. Here, air is more valuable than gold, and every step burns as much energy as a marathon runner uses in an hour. Shay is on the southeast ridge of Everest, on the Nepal side. It's the classic route, the Pioneer's Highway, but history offers no protection from the wind and cold. He's part of a large commercial group from the operator, Seven Summits Treks. All around him is a colorful line of jackets, masks, and oxygen tanks. Dozens of people are pushing for the summit alongside him. Right there with him are members of his own commercial expedition, people he's shared his life and risks with for the past few weeks. In a crowd like this, it feels like nothing bad can happen. The group works like a single machine. Step, breathe, step, breathe. May 16th, 2019. The time is 8:30 in the morning. Shay Lawless makes his final push and finds himself in a place where only the sky is higher. He's on the summit. He's done it. The emotions are overwhelming, but you can't see them under the mask. In this moment, he is the happiest man on the planet. He unfurls a flag, takes a photo for his sponsors and his family. Mission accomplished. The professor from Dublin has outplayed the mountain, but experienced climbers know a brutal truth. The summit is only halfway, and often, it's the safer half. The ultimate trap of Everest is that it grants you the euphoria of a winner precisely when you have the least amount of strength left. Shay doesn't linger at the top. The photos are taken, the goal is achieved, it's time to go down. The group begins their descent that same day without wasting time. He's moving in a rope team with several other members of the commercial group. The sun is shining brightly, the weather seems manageable, and none of them see the countdown timer that has already started. They're heading down towards camp, thinking of hot tea and a warm sleeping bag. It's 4 p.m., a time when any climber should already be warming their hands in a tent, but Shay is still on the slope. For the death zone, this is critically late. The sun begins to set, and with it goes the warmth, as the shadows on the snow grow long and menacing. It's at this moment, during the descent, that the timeline dissolves into chaos. The one thing everyone roped together fears happens. The chain breaks. The Himalayan database, the definitive record of all Himalayan ascents, pinpoints the incident at an altitude of 7,900 meters. It's a section of the route that looks close to camp on a map, but in reality, it remains lethally dangerous. Yet other reports and media accounts place the tragedy higher, near the area known as the Balcony, at 8,300 meters, a 400-meter difference in altitude. Under normal conditions, that's an hour's walk. Up here, it's an eternity. No one can say for sure what exactly happens in that split second. There are no witnesses to the fall. Theories begin to multiply like cracks in the ice. Some say Shay unclipped from the safety rope to get around a slower climber or to adjust his gear. Others suggest it was a sudden gust of wind, which can act like a battering ram on the ridge. But these are just guesses. The official reports confirm none of these theories. There is only one stark fact. 1 minute, a man was moving along the route, and the next, he was gone. The rest of the group makes it down to Camp 4. People pull off their masks, struggling to catch their breath, and begin a roll call. And then reality hits harder than the freezing cold. One person is missing. Shay Lawless doesn't arrive. His status changes in an instant. First, lagging behind. An hour later, missing. And as night blankets the slope, the understanding sinks in that there's almost no chance. Without oxygen, without help, in the dark at that altitude, survival becomes a matter not of willpower, but of physics. And up here, physics is working against you. The official wording sounds like a death sentence. Missing, presumed dead. His body was never found. Shay Lawless remains in the place he dreamed of reaching. His name is added to the tragic list of those who died in the spring of 2019. The mountain accepted his challenge, but refused to let him go. Everest keeps its secrets, and the professor's story becomes another reminder. The summit is only halfway, And the most important success isn't getting up, it's getting back home. Tragedy number 10. The death of a legend 200 meters from camp. He spends 21 hours on the summit of Everest without an oxygen tank. This man climbs to the roof of the world 10 times, becoming a living legend who seems unbreakable. But the end of his life doesn't come in an epic storm or during a heroic rescue. The greatest Sherpa of all time dies in perfectly clear weather. He simply goes for a walk just 200 meters from the safety of camp. It's quiet, the sun is shining, there's no hint of a threat. But one step on what looks like flat snow becomes fatal. This is the story of how a freak accident triumphs over colossal experience. The mountain claims its king not in a battle, but in a moment of absolute calm. To understand who the world lost that day, we need to rewind the tape a bit. In Nepal, the name Babu Chiri is spoken with the same reverence that Americans use for Michael Jordan. To the locals, he isn't just a climber, he's proof that the impossible only exists in other people's minds. Imagine a normal person in the death zone, at an altitude where commercial jets level off. The body is in such distress up there that it begins to slowly die from the very first minute. He stays on the summit of Everest for a record-breaking 21 hours without an oxygen mask. Doctors call it an anomaly, saying his brain should have shut down, but Babu just sits there, on top of the world, watching the clouds below. His lungs work like powerful compressors. It's in his blood. His father was a porter on the very first expedition in 1953, helping Hillary and Tenzing make history as the first to conquer Everest. Babu inherited those genetics and pushed them to the absolute limit. While Western climbers spend 4 days on their summit push, gasping for every breath, he practically runs up the mountain. 16 hours and 56 minutes. That's how long it takes him to get from the South Base camp to the peak. But behind these records lies not a thirst for fame, but a deep social pain. Babu hated the idea that Sherpas were just support staff, invisible figures on expeditions. He wanted the world to see his people as elite athletes. To prove it, he does the impossible. He summits Everest twice in 2 weeks. While others need months to recover, he just shakes off the fatigue and goes again. However, his strongest motivation had nothing to do with sports. The great record holder, this human phenomenon, couldn't read until he was an adult. In his village of Taksindu, there simply was no school. He teaches himself to read using discarded food labels and scraps of newspaper he finds on the tourist trails. Every step he takes upward, every risk, is money for building materials. He wants to build a school so his children won't have to learn the alphabet from candy wrappers. By 2001, he's a national hero, his dream almost within reach. He seems invincible, as if the mountains themselves are on his side. In 2001, Babu Chiri sets his sights on a challenge that sounds impossible even to veteran climbers. Just reaching the summit isn't enough for him. The expedition's goal is a double traverse. Picture this. He plans to ascend from the north side, descend to the south, then turn right around and do the whole thing in reverse. No one in history has ever accomplished anything like it. It's a survival marathon in a zone where most people can barely take a few steps. On April 29th, the group stops at Camp 2. They're at 6,400 meters. For a novice, this is the death zone. But for Babu's team, it's just a way station, a place to acclimatize. Today is a scheduled rest day, a day to just breathe, eat, and gather strength for the final push. The mood in camp is relaxed. No one senses any danger. But the weather plays a cruel trick on them. The morning is unnervingly perfect. The wind on Everest, which usually roars like a jet engine, has gone completely silent. The sun floods the glacier with brilliant light, and visibility is 100%. It feels like the mountain is asleep. This silence dulls their senses, switching off that internal danger radar that saves lives in a storm. Around 4 in the afternoon, Babu grabs his camera. He wants to take a few photos of the route for the expedition's archives. He doesn't put on his harness, doesn't take an ice axe. Why would he need them for a short walk on flat ground? He wanders just 200 meters from the tents. In the city, that's a 2-minute walk to the corner store, but the landscape is deceptive. A light snowfall had dusted the glacier the evening before. A thin layer of fresh powdery snow lies like a white blanket, hiding all the bumps, cracks, and holes. The surface looks solid, reliable, like asphalt. Babu sees a safe, open field in front of him. In reality, he's walking across a minefield where the snow has drifted over deep ice crevasses, creating fragile bridges. They look sturdy, but they're held together by nothing more than a prayer. An experienced eye might spot a fissure on open ice, but under fresh snow, the trap becomes invisible. Babu takes a step, confident that solid ground is beneath his feet. Back in camp, his teammates are calmly boiling tea, certain their leader is just enjoying the view. An hour passes, then another, and Babu doesn't return. At first, there's just confusion. He only stepped out for 5 minutes, but as dusk falls, it turns into a cold, creeping horror. They realize the greatest climber in the world couldn't just get lost on flat ground in clear weather. The group grabs their headlamps and heads out into the darkness. The beams of light cut through the night, revealing a single set of footprints. It's surreal. The boot prints lead in a straight, confident line, step by step, rhythmic and calm. And then, nothing. The tracks aren't smudged. There's no sign of a struggle or a slip. They just stop, as if the man was instantly erased from the face of the earth. The rescuers approach the edge and shine their lights down. What looked like a solid snowfield was a death trap. Beneath the thin layer of fresh powder lies a deep ice crevasse. The snow bridge, the fragile link that Babu stepped on, couldn't support the weight of a grown man and crumbled without a sound. The situation calls for desperate courage. The fissure in the glacier is so narrow a person can barely squeeze through, less than a meter wide. 2 Sherpas rope up and begin their descent into the icy throat of Everest. With every meter, the hope of finding their leader alive fades. This isn't just a hole, it's an abyss. The rope unspools further and further, 10 meters, 20. Only at a depth of 30 meters, the height of a 9-story building, does a headlamp beam catch the glint of a brightly colored jacket. The time on their watches is nearing midnight. The rescuers are met with a scene that is terrifying in its stillness. Babu is lying at the bottom of the crevasse. To an experienced climber, the position of his body says more than any formal report. He hadn't even had time to pull his hands out of his pockets. Normally, when a person falls, they instinctively throw out their arms, try to grab the edge to brace for impact. There's none of that here. It all happened faster than the signal could travel from his brain to his muscles. Gravity beat reaction time. The man who had cheated death for years in the death zone died instantly, without ever knowing the ground had vanished beneath his feet. Everest doesn't usually give back those it takes. The bodies of the fallen lie on its slopes for years, becoming grim landmarks for new expeditions. But for Babu Chiri, the rules of the game changed, even in the end. For him, the Sherpas attempt an operation that borders on the impossible. 60 people. An entire army of the best climbers unites with a single purpose: to bring the legend home. They face not just a descent, but a transport mission through the Khumbu Icefall. This is the most chaotic and dangerous part of the route. A giant labyrinth of ice towers the size of buildings that can collapse from a loud noise or a slight vibration. Normally, climbers sprint through here, praying for luck. But the rescue team moves slowly, step by step, carrying their heavy burden. Every second, they risk being buried there forever, alongside him. But no one turns back. When news of the tragedy reaches the valley, Nepal literally comes to a standstill. Radio stations interrupt their broadcasts, an unheard-of event for the country. Music and news fall silent, replaced by a collective grief. The people on the streets understand. They hadn't just lost an athlete, they had lost a symbol of hope. The royal family steps in. Realizing the hero's family is left without a provider, the monarchy takes on the care of his children. Babu's daughters, for whose future he stormed the heavens, are enrolled in a prestigious school in Kathmandu. But Babu's greatest legacy isn't the medals or the Guinness World Records. His dream, the one he was learning to read for from candy wrappers, becomes a reality. The school in his village of Taksindu is completed without him. The very children who might have followed the path of illiterate porters now sit at desks in warm classrooms. Babu wanted to change their lives, and he did, even at such a high price. His memory is preserved in concrete and on paper. A museum opens in the capital, and a national postage stamp is printed with his portrait. But the most poignant memorial stands right where it all ended. Near Camp 2, on the very route where he fell, climbers have built a memorial, It's now a place of pilgrimage. Every expedition on its way to the summit passes by, paying their respects. The stone reminds everyone who dreams of the peak. The mountains respect strength, but they don't forgive a moment's lapse in vigilance. Babu Chiri Sherpa proved that a man can climb above the clouds, but a single hidden step on a flat path carries more weight than 10 victories on Everest. Tragedy number 11. Blinded at the top of the world. He's looking out at the most beautiful mountains on the planet, with no idea he's seeing them for the last time. In a few minutes, an eternal darkness will fall for him. Peter Kinloch is standing on the summit of Mount Everest. He's energetic, cheerful, and taking incredible photos. This is part of his grand plan, to conquer the highest peaks on all 7 continents. But just half an hour after his triumph, the impossible happens. On the descent, Peter calmly informs his team that he can no longer see. First, his vision blurs. Then, complete blackness. They are in the death zone. Here, every step requires absolute concentration, and Peter can't take a single one on his own. The experienced guides spend hours trying to get him down. They are literally dragging a grown man, physically moving his legs for him. But at an altitude of 8,600 meters, this is a titanic effort. The temperature is plummeting. Their oxygen supplies are dwindling. The team comes to a terrifying realization. Another hour, and the chance of survival disappears for all of them. They make a brutal decision. The rescuers go down. Peter stays on the slope, in total darkness and fully conscious. So, who was this man, left behind in the dark? Peter Kinloch wasn't a professional athlete from a magazine cover, nor a millionaire seeking thrills. In his everyday life, he wore a collared shirt and worked at a computer. He was a civilian IT specialist for the Merseyside police, a regular guy from the office, not even 30 years old. But that was only one side of his life. The other was forged by harsh winds. Peter often spoke of his connection to the Isle of Skye. It's a place in Scotland where the weather can change 5 times a day, and the cliffs don't forgive mistakes. That's where his character was shaped. Peter had a huge goal, the 7 Summits Project. He wanted to climb the highest point on every continent. By the time of his Everest expedition, Peter was far from a novice. It's important to understand this. He knew the death zone from experience, not from books. He'd already summited Kilimanjaro and Elbrus. He'd stood on the peak of Aconcagua in South America. He had conquered Denali in Alaska, a mountain notorious for its monstrous cold and unpredictability. If you've done Denali, you're ready for almost anything. Peter was confident. His body was a well-oiled machine, and his experience told him he could handle this too. For the final push, he chose a commercial expedition with the company's summit climb. It's a reliable outfit. The overall leader is Dan Mazur, a legend in the climbing world. On the mountain itself, the summit team is led by guide David O'Brien. These are people who know Everest like the back of their hand. The route is on the North Ridge, from the Tibetan side. It's the path for the truly determined. The winds are stronger here, and there's less infrastructure than on the popular southern route from Nepal. Peter feels like part of a powerful machine. He has a proven team, a clear plan, and excellent acclimatization. It feels like every risk has been accounted for. Midnight in the death zone is no time for sleep. The clock reads 12 a.m. on the night of May 24th, heading into the 25th, 2010. The temperature drops to -30, and the air is so thin, you literally have to earn every single breath. It's right here, in the highest camp on the North Route, at an altitude of about 8,300 meters, that the final chapter of this story begins. The group steps out of their tents into complete darkness. Ahead, there's only the narrow beam of a headlamp and an endless climb. The climbers have a strict limit on the oxygen in their tanks. If they're delayed, their air will run out before they make it back to camp. Peter understands the stakes. He keeps pace with the group, tackling the famous obstacles of the North Ridge one by one. First, the first step, a jumble of rocks that demands caution. Then, the strange stone landmark known as Mushroom Rock. And finally, the second step, the most difficult part of the route, where you have to climb a rickety aluminum ladder over a sheer drop. There is no room for error here. One wrong move on that ladder, and you're falling for kilometers. But Peter handles it. He passes these points with no visible trouble. None of the guides notice anything strange. He doesn't complain, he doesn't fall behind, his coordination is fine. It seems like the mountain is accepting him. This is the classic trap of Everest. It lulls you into a false sense of security, giving you the illusion of control. By 1 in the afternoon, the group reaches the highest point on the planet, an altitude of 8,848 meters. The entire world is at their feet. At 1:18 p.m., Peter radios the base camp. His voice is cheerful, filled with joy, not exhaustion. He's doing what he's dreamed of for years, taking pictures with flags, looking out at the horizon, smiling at his teammates. And in this moment, the most terrifying thing happens. Nothing at all. No pain, no cries for help, no outward signs of trouble. Peter looks like a perfectly healthy person who has just achieved his life's greatest goal. He's joking around and getting ready for the descent. Neither he nor the experienced guides beside him have any idea that the wheels of disaster are already in motion, and the point of no return is just minutes away. Immediately after leaving the summit, something goes wrong. At first, it just looks like normal fatigue. Peter takes a few confident steps, then suddenly loses his balance. He stumbles on flat ground, gets up, walks normally, and a minute later, he collapses into the snow again. The guides look back. They don't understand what's happening. He's walking like a drunk man, but Peter is completely sober and lucid. His body has simply stopped obeying the commands from his brain that control spatial orientation. The time is 2 p.m. The group is approaching the second step. This is the spot with the ladder, where you need to be extremely precise. Here, Peter stops. He can't feel the rung with his foot. He asks for help to place his boot on the step. And in that moment, he says the words that change everything. I can't see anything. This isn't just blurry vision. It's complete, absolute blindness. At an altitude of 8,800 meters, he has gone blind. The situation instantly becomes a full-blown emergency. 3 experienced Sherpas rush to help Peter. These are incredibly strong men, but even their strength has limits. Imagine trying to lead a blind man along a narrow ridge where the path is sometimes no wider than your foot. Peter can't see where to step. He can't brace himself. The Sherpas are literally moving his limbs by hand. Time begins to work against them. Hours of grueling effort pass. The group makes it only a few hundred meters down and gets stuck near Mushroom Rock. Their pace drops to 0, the sun sets, and the cold starts to seep through their down jackets. This is the turning point. The rescuers are exhausted. The Sherpas start shivering, the first sign of hypothermia. Their oxygen supplies are running out. They understand the brutal calculus of the mountain. To stay here any longer means everyone will die. Trying to drag him further means dooming the entire 4-person team. The leader makes the hardest decision of his life. The rescue operation is called off. The Sherpas are forced to leave to save themselves. Peter is left alone on the slope, clipped to the safety ropes. He is alive, he is conscious, he understands what is happening, but he cannot take a single step. Around him, there is only wind, cold, and darkness. His heart stops in the early morning of May 26th, sometime after 2 a.m. He remains forever at an altitude of about 8,600 meters, just a few hundred vertical meters from the high camp. Anywhere else, leaving a living friend behind would be unthinkable. But here, in the death zone, different laws apply, and Peter's story becomes their most brutal proof. The world would learn of this as an unsolvable equation. A man conquers the summit, loses his sight, and is left alone. The incident splits public opinion. For some, it's a betrayal. For others, a grim necessity. Doctors try to understand why a healthy man would suddenly go blind. The leading theory is terrifying in its simplicity. The blood vessels in his eyes simply couldn't withstand the change in pressure and altitude. It happens without warning. Recovering a body from that height is nearly impossible, so he is likely still there, among the snows. Tragedy number 12. Died just meters from the summit. He died when he was just meters from the summit, only 48 meters. That's the height of a typical 15-story building. That's the insignificant distance separating Kenyan banker Joshua Kirui from the top of Everest. But he would never cross it. Here, in the dead zone near Bishop Rock, a strange and terrifying scene unfolds instead of a triumph. Joshua isn't moving up. He's standing on the narrow ridge, furiously fighting off his guide. His mind has played a cruel trick on him. Due to the lack of oxygen, the banker has lost his grip on reality. He's convinced he's full of energy, and he physically pushes away the life-saving oxygen mask his partner is trying to put on him. The guide, Nawang Sherpa, looks at his client. He has a simple choice. He could turn around and go back down, towards life and warmth. No one in the world would blame him for leaving a man who is refusing to be saved. But Nawang does something else. He simply sits down in the snow next to Joshua. The Sherpa decides to stay. In the end, one dies because of his own overwhelming ambition, and the other stays by his side to the very last, fulfilling his professional duty. The story of this climb doesn't end with a flag on the summit, but with two motionless figures forever left in the snow. To understand why this man is standing on the brink of death and refusing help, we need to come down from the heavens to earth, to Nairobi, to the offices of a major bank, KCB Group. This is where Joshua Kirui works. To his colleagues, he's a quiet, modest introvert in a business suit who is brilliant with numbers and strategies. But as soon as the workday ends, this clerk disappears. His alter ego awakens. In the mountains, he isn't known as a banker, but as Maverick, a lone rebel. Joshua leads a double life, on a scale that many can't even imagine. His physical fitness is beyond what most people can even comprehend. What takes professional teams days, he does in hours. He practically runs the routes on Mount Kenya. He competes in ultra-marathons in Europe and Asia, pushing his body to its limits. But this is precisely where the trap lies. Joshua makes the classic mistake of a powerful athlete. He confuses muscular endurance with high-altitude experience. He's convinced that if his legs can run for a day without stopping, his lungs can handle any thin air. A year before Everest, in 2023, he gets his first serious warning. Joshua heads to the 8,000er Manaslu. His goal, the summit without an oxygen tank. And he does it, becoming one of the few African climbers to summit Manaslu without oxygen. Sounds like a triumph, right? In reality, it was an alarm bell. During that climb, his body failed him. He developed high-altitude pulmonary edema twice. Any doctor would have called that a red card. But Joshua ignores the warning. He survives and draws a conclusion that will become fatal. I handled it then, so I can handle it always. He develops a rigid philosophy. For him, oxygen tanks are a form of cheating. He believes that using artificial air devalues the entire point of mountaineering. It's like driving a car in a marathon. He wants the purity of the attempt. But Joshua is a banker. He knows how to calculate risk. So he doesn't go completely alone. He hires Nawang Sherpa. Nawang is an experienced professional, but he has a very specific task. He's not just a guide, he's a shadow. His job is to be an invisible guardian angel, an insurance policy in case his client's self-confidence takes him too far. Joshua is certain he's in control because he has someone nearby to back him up. He just doesn't consider that at 8,000 meters, even the best guardian angel can be powerless. Joshua signs a document that sounds like a dark joke, but is in fact a final safety measure. His contract with the expedition includes a clause called "Go Bananas." It's an instruction for what to do if he loses his self-control. If the altitude robs him of his sanity, he gives his guides permission in advance to forcibly begin a descent, even if he resists. Joshua understands. Without oxygen, the brain can shut down before the legs do. He's trying to buy safety with money, so he gears up like an astronaut. Heated socks, battery-powered gloves. He believes technology will compensate for the lack of air. But nature has other plans. The weather closes the summit window. Joshua sits in his tent and waits. He develops the infamous Khumbu cough, a dry, barking cough. He's growing weaker before he's even started the final push. But he has a plan. For Joshua, this is a business project. He sets a hard deadline, Wednesday, May 22nd. On that day, he must be standing on the summit. No maybes. The night of the assault, May 21st. Camp 4, an altitude of almost 8,000 meters. The atmosphere here is heavy. The groups are on edge. Just yesterday, the mountain claimed 2 climbers. People are scared. But Joshua steps out into the darkness. On the narrow, icy ridge, the very thing he feared most happens. A traffic jam. A line of people is moving dangerously slow. For a climber with an oxygen tank, this is just an inconvenience. For Joshua, climbing without oxygen, it's a death sentence. Every time he stops in line, his body gets colder. His battery-powered socks are on, but the warmth inside him is fading. Just 240 meters from the summit, he does something that, in hindsight, will feel ominous. Joshua pulls out his phone. He sends a video message home. On screen, he looks confident, even cheerful. He says the summit is close. He believes it. But it's an illusion. Due to the traffic jams on the mountain and the thin air, his pace drops catastrophically. The window for the ascent is closing. He's still pushing upward, but his body's internal clock has already begun to count down. Instead of the quick final push he was counting on, what begins is a slow, grueling crawl toward the point of no return, 8,810 meters. At this point, near a feature known as Bishop Rock, Joshua ceases to be himself. His movements become erratic. His guide, Nawang, realizes this isn't just exhaustion, it's high-altitude cerebral edema. He grabs his radio and yells to base camp, "My client is delirious." Nawang pulls out an emergency oxygen bottle. It's the only chance to bring Joshua back to his senses. But then, something incredible happens. The banker starts to fight back. He's suffering from anosognosia, a terrifying condition where a person is so impaired, they're completely unaware of their own illness. A dying man convinced he's perfectly fine. Joshua physically shoves the mask away, tearing himself free and fighting the very person trying to save his life. Down at base camp, they can hear the chaos unfolding over the radio. A voice crackles back with a firm order. "Keep trying. Do not leave him." Those words essentially chain Nawang to the spot. He can't leave until he's exhausted every option, even as his own oxygen supply dwindles with every passing minute. Sometime later, another climber from a different group passes by. What he sees is like a chilling, frozen tableau. Joshua is lying just off the trail, unconscious. Nearby, sitting directly in the snow, is Nawang. He's motionless. His eyes are open, but they're staring into nothingness, a profound stupor. His oxygen ran out long ago. He's just sitting there. Sometime after noon on May 22nd, the radio falls silent for good. The airwaves go quiet. When a rescue team finally reaches their location, they find Joshua's body in an icy crevasse at 8,800 meters. He was just 48 vertical meters from the summit, but beside him, there's no one. The spot where the guide, Nawang, had been sitting is now empty. No gear, no footprints. He never descended, and he never made radio contact again. Nawang had simply vanished. Back in Nairobi, his family has to make the most difficult decision of their lives. Joshua's father calls a halt to any recovery operation. The family knows that trying to retrieve a body from that altitude would be a death sentence for any rescuer. They decide not to risk the lives of the living for someone who is already gone. In the end, Joshua became a symbol of African ambition, a man who proved he could challenge the world's elite. But the price of that proof was beyond measure. One man was left on that mountain because his will to conquer was too strong. The other was left there because, until his very last breath, he could not abandon the man who had placed his life in his hands.